It all started with Exodus. The Bible tells how God led Israel out of Egypt and how he spoke to them from the top of the Sinai. After 40 years in the desert, Israel entered the Promised Land. However, skeptical scientists have placed doubts on this story. Did it really happen? Watch this video as we explore not less than 10 clues that yes, the Exodus really happened. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more updates on exciting discoveries showing the Bible is true. One of the most well-known archaeologists in Israel is Israel Finkelstein. He wrote a very popular book that was translated into many languages called The Bible Unearthed. Here is a quote from his book. The historical saga contained in the Bible from Abraham's encounter with God and his journey to Canaan to Moses' deliverance of the children of Israel from bondage is a brilliant product of human imagination. Is he right? Well, he's not the only one with this opinion. The leading archaeologist of Egypt is Zahi Hawass. Whenever there is a major archaeological find in Egypt, Zahi Hawass is the one to present it. When he was interviewed by the New York Times, he said, "As archaeologists, we have to say that these stories of Abraham and Joseph and Moses never happened because there's no historical evidence." This opinion on the history of Israel seeps into the general population, so that Wikipedia states, based on the archaeological evidence, according to the modern archaeological account, the Israelites and their culture did not overtake the region by force, but instead branched out of the indigenous Canaanite peoples. Of course, if this is true, it's devastating to the claims of the Bible. The Exodus throughout the Old Testament is seen as the foundational story of God's care for his people. The Israelites are exhorted to trust God based on what he did in the Exodus, and believe that God has chosen them as his people because he led them out of Egypt. If that has no base in history, their faith surely would be ill-founded. So the question whether the Exodus really happened is an important one. How strong are the claims by skeptic scientists that the Exodus is a made-up story? One scholar, James Hoffmeyer, spent decades researching the questions. Rather than focusing on the archaeological evidence in Israel itself, he looked for evidence that would place Israel in Egypt. He found an amazing number of clues that Israel indeed had been in Egypt, and that therefore the Exodus story is true. He explains that each clue in itself could be explained away, but together they build a very strong case for the historical reliability of what the Bible says about the Exodus. Let's dive into his arguments and discover 10 strong clues uncovered by James Hoffmeyer. Before presenting the first clue, it's important to understand what makes the arguments compelling. The skeptic scientists generally believe that the book of Exodus was written in the 7th century, or maybe even later. If that's the case, you would expect the text to reflect that time. You would expect to find influences from Mesopotamia in the 7th century BC. However, if Exodus was written by Moses 600 to 800 years earlier, you would expect to find Egyptian influences from that period. Just imagine what would happen if you, living in the 21st century in the USA, would make up a story about the 14th century in Bolivia without knowing anything about Bolivia and without having access to historical sources. People with actual knowledge about Bolivia would probably laugh you out of the house and point out all the silly mistakes you made, showing you are familiar with the USA but very unfamiliar with Bolivia centuries ago. So, was the author of the Exodus stories familiar with Egypt in the period of the Exodus? Or is he making silly mistakes, showing he is actually living in another place many hundreds of kilometers away, many centuries later? Here are 10 examples showing that Exodus shows deep Egyptian influences. Clue number 10. Brick building. In the tomb of Rekhmire, an Egyptian prime minister in the 15th century BC, there are pictures of bricks being made by forced laborers who have to work in Egyptian construction projects. The interesting thing is that the workers are clearly non-Egyptian, and some of them look Semitic. This is described in Exodus 5, where Pharaoh says, "You shall no longer give the people straw to make bricks, as in the past, Let them go and gather straw for themselves. One picture from the tomb of Rechamira, with a laborer bent over under the heavy load of a yoke, reminds of Leviticus 26:3, where God says, "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, that you should not be their slaves. And I have broken the bars of your yoke and made you walk erect." So the brickmaking and building of Egyptian cities, described in Exodus by the Israelites, has its parallel in Egyptian archaeological findings from the right period. Clue number 9, agriculture. Agriculture in Egypt is very different from agriculture in Israel. In Egypt, it is dependent on the Nile, with canals for irrigation. Deuteronomy 11:10 reflects this. "For the land that you are entering to take possession of it is not like the land of Egypt from which you have come, where you sowed your seed and irrigated it like a garden of vegetables." Archaeological findings from the 15th century BC in Egypt show foreign workers engaged in this kind of agricultural work. In Psalm 81, it says, "I relieved your shoulders of the burden, and your hands were freed from the basket." This is another place where familiarity with Egyptian forced labor is shown. Baskets were used to take Nile soil as fertilizer to agricultural fields. And again, pictures of workers with this kind of baskets were found from the relevant period in Egypt. So the Exodus story displays knowledge of agricultural details from Egypt. Clue number 8, the gold calf. A well-known story from the Exodus is that the Israelites worshipped a golden calf soon after leaving Egypt. They could easily have taken this from Egypt, as Egypt was full of gods portrayed as bulls. Apis was a sacred bull worshipped in the area of Memphis. This is near Goshen, where according to the Bible the Israelites lived. Another bull god was Nevis from Heliopolis, so worshiping a golden calf made sense for a people that just left the country of the bull gods. Again, the Exodus story is a good fit with a historic Egyptian background. Clue number 7, the Tabernacle. An important part of the book of Exodus is a description of how the tabernacle is built. Skeptic scientists claim the tabernacle never existed and just is a projection from the latter temple in Jerusalem. However, Hofmeyr shows that a surprising number of words used in describing the tabernacle is of Egyptian origin. We'll give you just 2 examples here. Linen is used to cover the tabernacle. It's used for the priestly gown, and it's used for the sacred underwear worn by the priest. In every case, the Hebrew word that is used is the word shesh, and that is actually the Egyptian word for linen. After the book of Exodus, this word is hardly used anymore and replaced by a Hebrew word. The wood used in the construction of the tabernacle is acacia wood. This is already a good indication the story is based in real history, as acacia wood is the only sort of wood in South Canaan, Egypt, and the Sinai that you could use for the tabernacle. And there is an even stronger argument. The Hebrew word for acacia, shittim, is an Egyptian loanword. After the Exodus story, it is only encountered once in the rest of the Old Testament. So again, we have a strong Egyptian presence in the Exodus story, and also limited to the Exodus. Clue number 6, goldsmithing. The working of gold on wood was first mastered by the Egyptians. The funerary mask of Tutankhamun is a famous example from the approximate era of the Exodus of Egyptian goldsmithing. His tomb also contained examples of wood overlaid with gold. According to Exodus, this same process was used by the Israelites in the desert. Exodus 39:3 says, "And they hammered out gold leaf." Somebody must have learned how to do that in Egypt. Strikingly, the word used for gold leaf in the Hebrew Bible is pushai, which again is the Egyptian loan word. So this is the following Egyptian link in the Exodus story. Clue number 5, priestly attire. In the book of Exodus, extensive instructions are found for the clothing of the priests, and there is a remarkable overlap with the clothing of Egyptian priests in the time of the Exodus. The priestly underwear uses a word that is related to the pubic area in Egyptian. Egyptian priests had a sash around their waist, and so did the Israelite priest. The Hebrew word for this sash is aphnid, stems from the Egyptian bened, which means to wrap up. And the priest's turban, pa'ar, is derived from the Egyptian pyre, which means cloth band. A final possible connection is that Egyptian priests all have shaved heads. Korah was an Israelite who did not accept being excluded from the Israelite priesthood. His name means shaved head, so it is quite possible that he was a priest in Egypt and expected to be the same for the people of Israel. Clue number 4, 2 trumpets. In Numbers 10, the Israelites are ordered to make 2 silver trumpets to call the congregation of Israel together and to announce breaking camp. This is remarkable because the Israelites normally use ram's horns, the shofar, for these kinds of things. So why the silver trumpets? Again, there is an Egyptian connection, and God's command in Numbers 10 is building on experience the Israelites had in Egypt. In Tutankhamun's tomb, 2 trumpets were found as well, one of them silver. How were they used? Scenes from Egyptian reliefs show they are used in a similar way as the Israelites did, in religious festivals and to summon the troops. Clue number 3, geography. Exodus says that the Israelites had to build the city of Ramses. This city has been found by archaeologists, but Ramses was on a branch of the Nile that dried out and therefore was deserted. Ramses ceased to exist before 1200 BC. The new main Egyptian city was Zoan, which in some translations is called Tanis. The interesting thing is that Zoan is mentioned in the younger books of Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Psalms, but it is not in the Torah. The Torah gets this important geographical detail from the time of the Exodus rite. That would be impossible if it would have been written in another part of the Middle East many centuries after the city of Ramses was forgotten. Clue number 2, storage cities. Right at the beginning of the book of Exodus, in chapter 1, verse 11, it says that the Israelites built for Pharaoh storage cities, Pithom and Ramses. So what are store cities? That is a strange term which can only be understood when looking at Egypt in the period of the Exodus. The pharaohs built huge storage facilities associated with temple complexes and palace complexes. Archaeologists found them, and they were built with the mud bricks that Exodus says the Israelites had to make. There are no storage cities in Mesopotamia. There are no storage cities in Israel. There were no storage cities in Egypt in the 7th century BC, but there were storage cities in Egypt during the time of the Exodus. This is a very strong evidence that the Exodus is history and not fantasy. Clue number 1, names. When immigrants live in a country long, before long they start picking up the habits and language of that country. The earlier clues in this video show that the Israelites did the same in Egypt. This even extended to their names. Moses and Miriam probably are of Egyptian origin. But then you go through the list of the names of the Israelites mentioned in Exodus. There are many more examples that are even clearer. A remarkable number of Hebrew names from the time of the Exodus are derived from the Egyptian god Horus. Hur, Horai, and Pashur are examples of these. There is also a Harnefer in the tribe of Asher. His parents were probably very assimilated to Egyptian culture, for his name means Horus is beautiful. We've come to the end of our list of clues that indicate Israel was in Egypt, and therefore the story of the Exodus is historical, not mythical. Any one of these clues may not be decisive, but together they form a compelling and almost incontrovertible case. As Professor Hoffmeyer likes to say, there is not a lot of evidence of Israel in Egypt, but there is a lot of evidence of Egypt in Israel. Therefore, we confidently confirm what the Apostle Paul said in 1 Corinthians 10 when he speaks about the Exodus. These things happened.